Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Wednesday, October 26th, 2022. We try to do this each evening through a unique partnership with Alaska Public Media. And if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide in this broadcast, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. It'll bring up a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left. And when you go on that map, it's interactive. You can put your mouse on there, point and click, and get forecast and any relative watches, warnings, or advisories that are in effect for anywhere in the country. It's a good way to check up on family and friends and see what the weather's like where they are. And today we have, flood advisories and flood watches there way up in the northeast and eastern Maine. We have a scattering of some winter weather advisories in through portions of the central Rockies, frost, freeze advisories, southwest Oregon, northern California, even including near the coast there. And another interesting item, there's a potential for some lake effect snow coming in off the Great Salt Lake. I don't know if you knew that, but the Great Salt Lake, as well as a large lake like Lake Tahoe, can get lake effect snow, much like the Great Lakes, just on a smaller scale. And they are anticipating tonight into Thursday morning the potential for trace amounts to a couple inches of snowfall there just on the far west side of Salt Lake along I-80 back toward Tooele. And I spent a lot of time driving back and forth through that stretch when I served with the Weather Service at the Elko forecast office. So it's kind of an interesting fact there, just to keep in mind that yes, there are other places in the world you get lake effect, snow and cloudiness and rain showers and other things that can happen, especially when you get colder, unstable air crossing a relatively warmer body of water. So winter storm warning is still in effect for the Klondike Highway there north of Skagway above 1,500 feet, including White Pass through 10 p.m. this evening. Already 4 to 6 inches of snow has fallen in those elevations along the Klondike Highway, and a few more inches could fall yet here through late evening. Otherwise, that warning will be allowed to expire. The lower Bering Sea on up into the northern Gulf will see another area of low pressure track Friday into this weekend, so it'll bring a similar course track to the system that is currently located now in the northern Gulf. And overall, we are anticipating a cold Halloween statewide. Below normal temperatures will persist through at least the first week of November, with the potential for above normal precipitation, especially across areas of the interior. So that means mainly snow for non-coastal areas. And looking at some of the FAA webcams this afternoon, Dead Horse way to the north, patchy low clouds, 16 degrees. As we go down further southwest, Sandpoint and areas like Cold Bay, and we've seen winds gusting, as well as at Chicknick, winds gusting up around and over 60 miles an hour. Some light rain early this afternoon at Sandpoint with winds gusting to 60 miles an hour. And those high winds along the Alaska Peninsula will slowly diminish. The high wind warning was in effect at least through 4 p.m. this afternoon, but has since been allowed to expire. Soldotna, in the areas there of the northwestern Kenai, picked up some heavier snowfall yesterday afternoon through the overnight early pre-dawn. As much as 7 to 11 inches of snow fell around Sterling, Soldotna, and Kenai. Even up in through the Anchorage Bowl, 1 to as much as 3-4 inches fell, especially on the southwest side of town. The Weather Service office, the Anchorage Forecast Office, measured 3.5 inches of snowfall with this particular system. Then farther east, as I mentioned, Skagway, the Klondike Highway will still be under that winter storm warning until 10 p.m. this Wednesday evening. Skagway itself has picked up around an inch and a half of wet snow, but right now just some light snow and fog reported, temperature just above freezing, so they're not going to see as much snow there at the lower elevations there of Skagway. And across the state, at least yesterday, you may remember, we had a number of advisories and warnings. The only one that remains is that area of the Klondike Highway up through White Pass until 10 p.m. this evening. And as I mentioned, winds will be coming down across the Alaska Peninsula after gusting at times well over 60 miles an hour at some of the more notable stations. So here is the satellite imagery showing just the bright enhanced clouds pushing through the eastern Gulf and Panhandle where there is some heavier rainfall. The inner coastal mountains there into British Columbia are getting pounded with heavy snow. And you can see a really tightly wrapped little curl in the clouds there around Prince William Sound, and just east of there, that is the low pressure center. And then a scattering of showers south of there. It's not impossible. There could be a few flashes of lightning with some of those enhanced convective clouds, not just out over the Gulf, but also back toward Kodiak Island and just downwind of the Alaska Peninsula as we go through the next day or so. Just enough instability with the colder air coming in over the relatively warmer waters of the Gulf. And further west, we can see some showers off the southwest coast. And overall, we anticipate the low that's currently over the western Gulf, it's going to kind of sit there over the northern Gulf, sit and spin and gradually weaken here over the next couple of days. There's a secondary low coming in off the eastern Russian coast. That feature is just going to serve to enhance the colder air wrapping in around the main Gulf low. And as a result, keep some scattered rain and snow showers going there across much of the Bering, especially eastern Bering Sea, and across the Alaska Peninsula as we go into tomorrow and during the day on Friday. So here's the map overnight early on Thursday morning. Low pressure over the northern Gulf, mainly rain for the inner channels and outer coast of the Panhandle, but snow the interior mountains and the far north. And then back toward the southwest, we'll just see some snow showers continuing and out over the southeastern Bering, a mix of rain and snow showers extending into the Alaska Peninsula. Still windy, but not quite as windy as what we saw here today. And as we go through Thursday, notice the low just sitting out there over the northern Gulf continues to just kind of be slowly weakening, breezy around it though, with a continuation of areas of precipitation. The interior of the mainland though will see some drier weather. There could be a stray flurry here or there, some scattered snow showers around some of the mountains, but that'd be about it. Just some colder temperatures. Further west, the next low shows up there just to the west, southwest of the western Aleutians, and that'll be the next feature there. It moves through the lower Bering Sea on Friday and actually strengthens a bit. That'll bring some wind and precipitation. North side of it, some snow. And as that low works its way eastward, that energy will redevelop a low over the northern Gulf, much in a similar position with the low that is currently residing there. And that could set another round of wind and precipitation, especially for the Panhandle here as we go over the weekend, the latter half of the weekend. Meantime, low temperatures Thursday morning, still some 40s in the southern portion of the Panhandle, otherwise below freezing away from the coast. Teens there up through the Copper River Basin along the Alaska Range. Thursday afternoon, we'll get some temperatures, 40s, could flirt with 50 down toward Haida Gwaii and Craig and perhaps Metlakatla. Otherwise, temperatures generally below freezing, Anchorage northward, near 40 at Kodiak and over toward the Alaska Peninsula. And then Friday morning, any clearing will allow lows to get well down into the single digits to near zero there through the Copper River Basin and along the Alaska Range. Teens in through places like the Kenai, Soldotna, as well as Anchorage. And for Friday afternoon, still some 40s showing up there in the Panhandle, but again, cold temperatures only in the 20s for highs, so sub-freezing temperatures anticipated across much of South Central. Across the interior, widespread single digits above and below zero, especially along the North Slope Brooks Range and the middle upper Yukon Valley. Lower 20s around the Seward Peninsula and Norton Sound. And then Thursday afternoon, high temperatures stay in the single digits there across the Brooks Range North Slope. Teens and 20s elsewhere, and even a bit colder Friday morning for the interior. Many areas starting now to slip a bit below zero, and areas along the Seward Peninsula and Norton Sound getting lows down to near 20 degrees with temperatures Friday afternoon. Some single-digit highs in the Brooks Range, 10, 15 degrees up there through much of the middle and upper Yukon Valley. And looking at Thursday morning lows, generally below freezing in the southwest interior. Thursday afternoon highs may get up around or just above freezing along the outer southwest coast, Bristol Bay, 40s along the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians. Friday morning, colder temperatures there once you start creeping up there, the Yukon and Kuskokwim valleys, teens and some single digits above freezing Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians. Friday afternoon, we'll get temperatures, they'll stay below freezing in the 20s, mainly there in the southwest interior, but still some 40s again showing up there as you go out along the tip of the Alaska Peninsula and through the Aleutians. So the 6 to 10 day temperature forecast for the beginning of November, we're just going to see below normal temperatures across much of the state, centered on the southeast, including the south, say Copper River Basin around Prince William Sound and in through especially the northern 2/3 of the Panhandle. So we are expecting some rather chilly temperatures, and any nighttime clearing with some fresh snow cover could easily get temperatures down into the single digits above or below zero. And then precipitation is expected to average above normal in early November, especially there along and north of the Alaska Range and along the Yukon River and extending into the northern Panhandle. So that means for many areas away from the coast, that'll be precipitation mainly as snow.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
It's now time to check your aviation weather, and if you have a flight planned Thursday or on Friday, we'll have an area of low pressure that just kind of sits out over the northern Gulf, and this low is just going to gradually weaken as we head through Friday into the early weekend. Meanwhile, by the time we get into Friday, another low will be tracking eastward just north of the Aleutians across the lower Bering Sea. So in the meantime, we're going to see some areas of IFR along, especially the inner channels, intercoastal mountains there of the Panhandle, also Copper River Basin and back toward the southwest YK deltas. And it could also even be a few flashes of lightning off of the southeast Panhandle coast just due to some convective instability. And Thursday afternoon, again, there could be a flash or two of lightning there in the Gulf, and then southwest there of Kodiak Island, downwind there of the Alaska Peninsula and the North Pacific. Otherwise, we expect some IFR there. Southeast interior mountains, including St. Elias, Wrangell Mountain area around McCarthy. And otherwise, MVFR fairly common along the Alaska Range, parts of the Yukon Valley, as well as the Arctic coast. Friday morning still could be an isolated flash or two of lightning off of the Panhandle coast there and through the northeastern eastern Gulf. IFR conditions, inner channels, intercoastal mountains towards British Columbia there in the southeast, and then a broad area of IFR conditions along the central western Aleutians in association with the next frontal system and low that'll be tracking through the lower Bering, and we can see the effects of that come Friday afternoon. We'll still see a broad area of IFR conditions there, lower Bering toward St. Paul, St. George, and creeping up with the frontal system into areas of the Alaska Peninsula. It's still an isolated flash or two of lightning possible along areas of the northeast and eastern Gulf off of the southeastern Panhandle coast. So checking pass conditions on Thursday, Anaktuvik Pass should generally see VFR conditions. Same thing at Adigan Pass. The interior is going to generally be VFR or MVFR with colder temperatures in place. Lake Clark and Merrill will hold on to MVFR conditions during the day on Thursday as we round up through rainy as well as into Windy Pass. Generally, MVFR conditions will hold, though, as we go down south of the south entrance, we do expect some VFR conditions there in the central, south of the central Alaska Range, and then further east, MVFR conditions possibly becoming VFR there on Thursday at Isabel. Mentasta Pass should generally hold MVFR conditions with area of IFR conditions as you fly south of the south entrance. Tanita Pass, generally VFR conditions are expected. Portage Pass, also VFR conditions. And then in through the far northern Panhandle, the Chilkoot and White Passes, IFR conditions gradually becoming MVFR as we get into Thursday afternoon and evening. Freezing levels, the surface freezing line has crept down to along the southwest coast and down near the northern Gulf Coast as well as in through the inner channels, especially central northern areas of the Panhandle. And we see freezing levels aloft to 2,000 feet are all the way down toward the central Aleutians, well down to along the Gulf North Pacific interface, and about 4,000 feet there over Haida Gwaii. Greatest threat for icing will be there across areas of the Gulf Coast from Prince William Sound across much of the Panhandle. Haida Gwaii could be some moderate icing generally above 3 to 5, 4 to 6,000 feet. Otherwise, the interior and back toward the Alaska Peninsula, isolated areas above 3,000 feet and generally above 4,000 feet there in through the central Bering. Upper level jet stream winds, we have a jet core coming into British Columbia there, upwards of 150 knots. Another one, northwest flow coming across the Alaska Peninsula with a jet core of 155 knots at 30,000 feet. We see the low pressure circulation sitting back there through the northwestern Gulf at 9,000 feet or 700 millibars. Broad area of winds 60 to 75 knots or so, not just southwest of the western Aleutians, but across the Alaska Peninsula into the lower Gulf, North Pacific, coming up through British Columbia. And then down to 3,000 feet, we still have that low pressure circulation located there along the northern Gulf Coast. Broad area counterclockwise winds across the Alaska Peninsula from the northwest at 3,000 feet on the order of, say, 40 to 50 knots. And that will translate to areas of turbulence. Could be isolated severe turbulence still across areas of the Alaska Peninsula. Surface to 4, surface to 6,000 feet, especially around some of the mountains there, Kodiak Island, the lower end of the Alaska range. Pockets of turbulence, surface to 3, 4,000 feet there in the far west, Seward Peninsula, northeast, and through parts of the Panhandle.
We have a big solar flare coming in, so we're out here on an aurora hunt. It's a CME, it's a dynamite, coronal mass ejection. It's when the sun, it kicks off energy in these explosions that are larger than the Earth, explosion type things coming off of sunspots. And if that energy is pointing straight at the Earth, it gets caught up in our magnetic field, and that energy, electrons, come down our magnetic field, collide with oxygen up there about 50 or a couple hundred miles high, and that's what generates the northern lights. My job as the photographer and the aurora hunter is to be in position, you know, location, location, location. And I like to think I'm composing. Mother Nature, it's a bit of a teamwork thing, you know, she's got to put on the show, but I have to be in the right position and of course with the right tools and the know-how. I've stopped keeping track of how much time I spend out here in terms of hours. It's more in terms of weeks or months, or at this point years now. You know, it was always in me. Even when I was a kid growing up in the lower 48, I would spend nights sleeping on our trampoline, just staring at the stars. I'm in 4th grade and I'm going, wow, look at those stars. And I'd see how many nights in a row I could sleep on the trampoline. And I think my record was 23 nights in a row. So I was doing kind of strange things for an Iowa country boy. I can remember specifically the very first time I saw the northern lights. It was 1989, the peak of the solar cycle, and I was going to graduate school in Laramie, Wyoming. And all of a sudden we had heard the northern lights were out. It's like, what are those? I'd never really seen them before. And my goodness gracious, we were on top of a mountain in the Laramie Range and they were turning blood red. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And the very first picture I took, that was 1990. Now, an old film camera, Pentax K1000 on a plastic Kmart tripod. Took 2 shots on slide film and got them back. And I thought, oh my gosh, this beautiful green thing swirling about. And from that moment, I was hooked. When I realized that you could preserve the auroras on film, I just experimented a ton. I'd had a heaping stack of slides, the no good ones. The experiments gone wrong, you know, too dark, fuzzy, out of focus, too light. I had this huge garbage can full of excess slide film, and that was just the learning curve. Well, when I go out here, it's all about getting the shot. And my wife and I, we've called it the hero shot. But the hero shot is the one where you just come home and you go, look at this. And everyone goes, wow, and you feel like a hero. It's a wonderful feeling. You know, it's good for the ego, of course. It's good for the business. But if you kind of strip that away, it's good for what's inside you, because that's really the hero moment in nature. And Mother Nature's putting on this show that is just mind-blowing. It's unbelievable. When I first resigned from my day job, that was in 1996, and decided I wanted to become a full-time aurora hunter, my goal from that moment and to this day still is to get one hero shot a year. I figured, and I'm talking the kind that somebody wants to buy from you and hang on their wall, where the auroras are extremely bright, very active, turning colors, where you can't believe your eyes. If you get to preserve a little sample of that with a photograph, well, it's what we call the hero shot. Wow, what a feeling. I mean, you're elevated, levitating, you are lifted up, your spirits are so high that I love that feeling. And I think I get that so much from seeing cool things in nature that I will go way out of my way to find that. And I can, the next day, well, I'll be just laying there thinking about it and thinking how lucky I was, or how fortunate. Of course, I just spent 2 weeks sitting there staring at the sky and not seeing anything, so you got to remember that luck is kind of a relative term, but I still just feel incredibly lucky to be even in a position to where I could have been there, taken a photograph of it, and just mainly experienced it. Well, that feeling could last for days.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and we'll conclude the show with the marine weather segment and looking at the sea ice edge. Today we expect that ice to continue to expand across the Arctic region there, though we've had some rather brisk easterly winds up along that area. Now, ice continues to grow also along the shoreline there in the northwest coast and in surrounding areas of Kotzebue Sound along the north side of the Seward Peninsula, and also down into areas even of Norton Sound. And we're starting to see even a few areas down along the southwest coast and even up into Cook Inlet getting a little bit of ice trying to form. And we're going to see this colder weather pattern hold right up through at least the first week of November, so look for further ice development. And as far as the marine forecast on Thursday, inner channels of the Panhandle, winds will be south 25 to 30 knots. Waves could be as high as 14 feet there. Dixon entrance, 6 feet up towards Petersburg. 15 knots with 3-foot waves there in Lynn Canal. The outer coast, west-southwest winds up to 35-knot gales. Waves generally running in excess of 20 feet off of Sitka and Craig. As winds turn more east-southeast at 25 knots, waves come down to about 14 to 16 feet in the open waters off of Yakutat toward Prince William Sound. And then on Friday, winds will be out of the south-southeast, 25 to 30 knots, inner channels, 5 to 6 foot waves, Petersburg down through Ketchikan. North winds at 20 knots with 4-foot waves, Lynn Canal. Winds will generally be out of the west-southwest, south of Sitka, 25 to 30 knots, waves 17 to 19 feet. Turning more southeast and even offshore there west of Yakutat at 20 knots and waves of 11 to 13 feet. The northwestern Gulf, winds will be out of the northwest off the Kenai, 35 knots, 14-foot waves. Strongest winds 45 to 50 knot storm force winds there around the mouth of Cook Inlet to just northeast of Kodiak with waves 14 to as high as 20 feet. Northwest winds Prince William Sound at 30 knots, waves 7 feet, and upper Cook Inlet, look for north winds 20 knots and waves around 4 feet. On Friday, winds will be out of the north across Prince William Sound at 15 knots, waves 3 feet. northwest to north winds as we go down through upper and middle Cook Inlet at 15 to 25 knots, waves 4 to 6 feet, and then northwesterly winds to 40 knots there at the entrance of Cook Inlet to northeast of Kodiak with waves of 12 to 14 feet. Thursday we'll have some strong winds there through Shelikof Strait, gusting up to 50 knots, waves 7 feet, and along the North Pacific and Western Gulf we expect in the open waters waves running anywhere from say 16 to near 20 feet with 40-knot westerly gales. And then across the north side of the Alaska Peninsula, northwest to west winds to 40 knots, waves 17 to 18 feet outside there, Bristol Bay down to north of Cold Bay. For Friday, low pressure will be approaching from the west. Still northwest winds across Kodiak Island, 30 to 40 knots, though decreasing. The winds will turn more out of the south and then east as we go down the length of the Alaska Peninsula with waves 17 feet there south of Sand Point, 13 feet north of Cold Bay. On Thursday, look for westerly winds across the central and eastern Aleutians, as high as 35-knot gales there around Dutch Harbor. Waves will be running 8 to 12 feet on the North Pacific side and 11 to 16 feet on the Bering side. And for Friday, as low pressure tracks just north of the central and approaching north of the eastern Aleutians, we expect westerly gales to increase to 45 knots from Nikolsky west through Atka and Adak, with waves in excess of 20 feet on the North Pacific side and running about 18 to 20 feet or so on the Bering side. Winds across the lower southeastern portion of the Bering Sea on Thursday will be out of the northwest, 30 to 40 knots, with waves 15 feet around St. Paul, St. George, 17 feet there south of Nunavik Island, and look for north-northwest winds, Norton Sound, south of St. Lawrence Island at 20 knots, waves 5 feet within Norton Sound. And then Friday's winds will come down a bit across much of the area. Still, though, out of the east-northeast, 30 knots from Kuskokwim Bay to St. Paul, St. George, waves 7 to 8 feet, but falling off to the north-northwest at 10 to 15 knots, Norton Sound down through south of St. Lawrence with waves of 3 to 5 feet. And then finally, the Arctic coast, east winds to 30 knots, waves 7 to 10 feet, north winds through the lower Chukchi Sea, 4 to 6 foot waves, and easterly winds across much of the region, 20 to 25 knots on Friday.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.